There's no way we're going to survive. Nobody is going to survive this storm. Those were the words running through Police Chief Darwin Hathcock's mind at 3:44 on the afternoon of April 27th, 2011. He stood near the police station in Smithville, Mississippi, a town of barely 1,000 people, and watched a wall of wind and debris climb toward him. It moved too fast to outrun, too wide to dodge, and in that moment, something odd settled over him, a kind of calm. He had accepted that he was about to die, and he felt almost peaceful about it. What Hathcock could not have known, standing there waiting for the end, was that the storm bearing down on his town had already done something no forecaster had ever watched happen so cleanly. It had turned from harmless to monstrous in 6 seconds. This is the story of that tornado, and of why it still troubles the people whose entire job is to understand storms. That afternoon belonged to the largest tornado outbreak the United States had ever recorded. Storm after storm tore across the South for hours, and radar screens glowed with warning colors from Mississippi through Alabama. Forecasters had been sounding alarms since sunrise. In Smithville, most people already sensed the sky looked wrong. The air hung heavy and still, the kind of quiet country folk learned to distrust. 16-year-old Johnny Parker sat at home in front of his radar feed, tracking each cell as it bloomed on the map. Johnny lived with cerebral palsy and could not speak easily, but his fingers flew across the keyboard. As the danger sharpened into something specific, he typed warning after warning, firing alerts to more than 100 friends across town, telling them to take cover right now. He was still typing when his father screamed from another room. The storm was no longer a shape on a screen. It was outside the window, and it was almost on the house. Subscribe to the channel, because what unfolded over the next few minutes rewrote how storm scientists think about the warnings they send. The tornado touched down at 3:42 in the afternoon, about 3 miles west-southwest of town near the Tennessee-Tombigbee waterway, over a stretch where no one was watching closely. For its first moment on the ground, it looked ordinary, weak even. Survey teams would later note initial tree damage near the touchdown point as EF1 intensity, the kind of spin that snaps branches and peels a few shingles. Then, in the span of a single breath, the whole system transformed. Within just a few minutes as it tracked northeast, the tornado rapidly intensified from an EF1 to an EF5. That is the jump from a storm that rattles a fence to one that lifts a house off the earth. Forecasters spend entire careers studying how tornadoes gain strength, and while many build gradually, rapid intensification remains a dangerous hazard. This one skipped the middle completely. By the time it broke free of the tree line, it had become a worst-case scenario unfolding, aimed straight down the road at Smithville. At 3:44, the tornado struck the edge of town at full strength. The winds inside it reached an estimated 205 miles per hour, close to the ceiling of what the atmosphere can generate anywhere on the planet. To the people who saw it, it did not look like the narrow funnel most of us picture. It looked like a moving mountain, a churning black mass packed with lumber, sheet metal, and the shredded pieces of homes it had already taken upwind. First responders had only seconds to react. The town's sirens wailed, but the noise of the storm buried the sound. Roofs peeled away, transformers burst, and the power died in an instant. And in the first heartbeat of contact, the tornado began doing something to Smithville that would leave investigators quietly stunned as they walked the wreckage days later. It was carrying the town away, piece by piece. Here is what turned a disaster into a trap almost no one could escape. Most tornadoes crawl across the ground at 20 or 30 miles an hour, which gives people a narrow window to hide or to drive out of the path if they move fast. This one did not crawl. It sprinted. Its forward speed reached 70 miles per hour, a ludicrously high pace for a storm this violent. Sit with that for a second. The winds inside were shredding everything at peak intensity, and the entire funnel was also charging across the countryside faster than a car on the interstate. There was no driving away from it. There was barely time to reach an inner hallway before it arrived. The residents of Smithville were primed for devastation, boxed in by a monster that left almost no gap between the first distant rumble and the instant it stood at their front doors. And it came to the door of a mother named Mona Young. Mona was standing in her driveway when she spotted it, the churning darkness bearing down on her home. She grabbed her 13-year-old son, Fisher, and the two of them bolted inside and threw themselves into the bathtub. Mona stretched her body across Fisher, shielding him with her own back, and started to pray. Then the pressure arrived. The wind grew so powerful that it peeled her up off her son, lifting her into the air even as she clawed to hold on to him. Around them, the house groaned under the strain, trees snapping and nails prying from the frame as the monster passed overhead. Mona kept praying through the deafening roar, certain these were the final moments for both of them. When the noise finally moved on, she and Fisher were somehow still there, still breathing. Others in Smithville that afternoon would not walk away. Between 3:44 and 3:47, the tornado carved straight through the heart of town. And in that short window, it did something that stopped hardened investigators cold. 18 homes were destroyed, most of them well-built. Two-story homes lifted completely off their concrete foundations, not damaged, not knocked flat, gone. When survey crews walked those neighborhoods afterward, they found clean, bare slabs, where families had eaten breakfast that morning. The outlines of the rooms still traced in the concrete, and almost nothing left on top of them. Many of these were sturdy houses, bolted down, the kind people trust to ride out a bad storm. The wind pulled them off the ground and scattered them across the surrounding fields. Across town, 117 structures were destroyed outright. To meteorologists, a swept-clean foundation is the fingerprint of the rarest and most extreme tornadoes ever recorded. And here, they were finding them by the block. If this is landing with you, take a second to hit like. It helps the algorithm carry this story to more people who want to understand how storms like this take shape. A block and a half away, Michelle Wardlaw stood on her brother's front porch as the tornado loomed into view. What she described afterward remains one of the eeriest accounts of the entire day. There was no sound. An unnatural silence pressed down around her, broken only by a pressure so fierce that her ears felt as though they might burst. Inside the black vortex, she saw white dots surging in and out, spinning like flakes trapped in a shaken jar. Those white dots were not snow. They were cars and chunks of houses, tumbling weightlessly inside the funnel. The calm shattered the instant she grasped what she was actually looking at. Michelle seized her grandmother and tried to reach a storm cellar, but the storm struck before they made it, flinging Michelle into the cellar and sweeping her grandmother away into a nearby ditch. That deep quiet she had felt was the storm inhaling the air itself toward its core, a signal that came far too late to mean anything except run. Then came the details that read like the laws of physics breaking. At 3:47, the storm reached into a driveway, grabbed a parked, empty red Ford Explorer, and hurled it half a mile through the air. The vehicle slammed into the town's water tower hard enough to leave a permanent dent in the steel, then dropped another quarter-mile beyond it before coming to rest. A 1965 Chevrolet pickup was torn from a residential driveway and simply disappeared. Search crews combed the area for it and never found a trace. Not a panel, not a bumper. As the tornado ground down the streets, it peeled the tar and chip pavement clean off the roads and dug a trench of scoured earth a full foot deep, scraping the soil away like the peel off an apple. This is the caliber of damage that shows up in fewer than 1 in 100 tornadoes. And then, as abruptly as it had sprung to life over that patch of trees, the storm began to lose its grip. The tornado held onto the ground far past Smithville, grinding northeast across the state line into Alabama. At 4:23 in the afternoon, it finally lifted and dissolved near the community of Hodges. From touchdown to death, it had gouged a path 37.3 miles long. The whole ordeal ran roughly 40 minutes, yet the most brutal stretch through the center of town lasted less than 20 seconds. It emerged from a forest as barely a whisper, swelled into one of the strongest tornadoes ever documented, and then thinned back into nothing, just as quickly as it came. In its wake, quiet returned to Smithville. This time, the stillness carried no pressure and no roar. There was only the sound of people beginning to call out for one another across a place that no longer resembled the town they knew. When the noise finally faded, Darwin Hathcock was still standing. The chief, who had made peace with dying near the police station, opened his eyes to a town he barely recognized. The buildings that had framed his view minutes earlier were simply not there anymore. He had braced for the end and been handed his life instead, and now that life had a single task in front of it. Around him, the same story played out in doorway after doorway. People who had ridden out the disaster in bathtubs and closets and hallways stepped into the open, dazed, calling names into the dust. The first hours belonged to neighbors digging for neighbors, long before official help could reach a town this remote. Cell service faltered. Roads lay buried under debris and stripped of their surface. And through all of it ran the same disbelief, the sense that something had passed over Smithville that should not have been possible. When the surveys were finished, the numbers laid out the scale of the loss. Along its full path, the tornado killed 23 people and injured 137 more. 16 of the dead came from Smithville alone, a community of only 942 residents. That means nearly 1 in every 60 people in town died within the span of a few minutes. Rescue crews and volunteers worked deep into the night, lifting away shattered walls by hand. The tornado earned the highest rating the official scale allows, an EF6, with winds estimated at 205 miles per hour, crossing into the top-tier category. In a place this small, the grief reached into nearly every household at once. In the years since, the storm has taken on a second life inside the debates of weather enthusiasts. Because the destruction ran so far past normal, online forums still argue that Smithville deserved an EF6 rating, a category that has never existed. The scale stops at EF5, and meteorologists push back firmly on the invented label, warning that sensational terms only cloud the actual science. A handful of dramatic stories grew around the event as well, tales of impossible feats that later, more careful surveys quietly walked back. What the experts keep coming back to is not the legends, but the hard measurements they recorded on the ground. Facts strange enough on their own that no one ever needed to stretch them. This is the core of why the storm still unsettles the scientists who study it. Rapid intensification is the outcome forecasters dread most, because it robs people of the one thing that keeps them alive during a tornado: time. A storm that builds slowly gives the sirens a chance to work and hands families a few precious minutes to get low and take cover. While advance warnings were issued by forecasters, Smithville had almost no time once the storm touched down and instantly reached peak power. The tornado reached its full, house-erasing power over an empty stand of trees, hidden from every eye until it burst into the open already at its peak. If that can happen over a forest 3 miles from a town, it can happen anywhere a storm crosses woods or open fields before it reaches homes. The question of how to warn people about a monster that assembles itself in 6 seconds is one the field is still working to answer. The town refused to let its people be remembered as nothing more than a count of the dead. Consider Johnny Parker again, the teenager who typed warnings to 100 friends before taking cover as his own house came apart around him. He and his sister Chloe survived by pressing themselves into a hallway as the walls gave way. The alerts he fired off that afternoon are credited with helping neighbors reach shelter before the storm arrived. Johnny grew up and became a professional meteorologist, turning the worst day of his childhood into a life spent watching the sky on behalf of other towns. On April 27th, 2024, Smithville officially named a street in his honor. Johnny Parker Street now runs through the community he helped protect, a quiet marker for a kid who refused to stay silent when it counted most. In April of 2026, 15 years on from that afternoon, the people of Smithville gathered once more at their memorial and read the 16 names aloud, one by one. The town has rebuilt. New homes stand on ground where clean slabs once caught the sun. But what happened there still lives inside classrooms and forecasting offices, a standing reminder that the sky can shift from calm to catastrophe faster than any warning can ever travel. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the weight of those 6 seconds over the trees, like and subscribe. There are more accounts like this one waiting to be understood, and every person who watches helps carry the hard lessons of Smithville to someone who may need them when their own sky turns.